A voltaic cell is an electrochemical cell that uses a spontaneous redox reaction to generate electricity. The term electrochemical means that there is both electricity or electrons and a chemical reaction involved. The term spontaneous reaction means that this is a reaction that happens without outside intervention, and the fact that it generates electricity tells us that this setup here behaves as a simple battery. You will recall there are two types of electrochemical cells. There's a voltaic cell, which is being discussed in this video, and an electrolytic cell, which will be done in another video. Let's take a look at an example of a spontaneous redox reaction. When you place zinc metal in a solution of copper sulfate, a reaction happens. You form solid copper on the surface of the zinc, and the color of the solution becomes lighter. The original color of the solution here is due to the copper 2+ ions, and the reason it becomes lighter is because the copper 2+ ions is being converted into solid copper. So the concentration of the copper 2+ ions is decreasing. When we take a close look at this ionic equation here, it's also known as the net ionic equation. We have removed the sulfate ions because the sulfate ions were spectator ions. We can see that zinc goes from solid zinc to zinc 2+. Well, that's oxidation, and copper 2+ going to copper solid is reduction. We can write half reactions for these. So my oxidation half reaction for this reaction here will look as follows. Solid zinc goes to zinc 2+ ions plus 2 electrons. We can also write the reduction half reaction, and here the reduction half reaction will be aqueous copper 2+ ions picking up 2 electrons and forming solid copper. You can see now that in this reaction, zinc produced 2 electrons which were picked up by copper 2+. So zinc transferred 2 electrons to copper 2+ ions. We can now use this spontaneous redox reaction to create a voltaic cell, which will generate electricity. The basic premise of this is, instead of having zinc transfer the 2 electrons directly to the copper 2+ ions here, what if we were to separate these and put them in 2 different containers? Well, here's the zinc and here's the copper sulfate solution. And now you notice that they are in 2 separate beakers. Now, in order for the electrons to go from zinc to the copper 2+ ions here, we need to have this setup here. This is the basic setup for a voltaic cell. You can see that the zinc metal is placed in a solution of zinc sulfate. So typically it's in a solution that contains zinc ions. In this case, if this was lithium, for example, this would have to be lithium ions, so on and so forth. And on the other side here, we have placed a piece of copper metal in the solution of the copper 2+ ions. We have also added a wire to connect the 2 pieces of metal together. In this case, we have a light bulb, and that's showing you that there's electricity flowing. Obviously, electricity is just flow of electrons. And the 2 beakers here are connected with something called a salt bridge. Now, the salt bridge is a tube, or you can use a filter paper if you're doing this as a lab. And the salt bridge essentially completes the circuit. Some of the terminology here that you need to be familiar with are that the zinc metal here is now called the anode, and the copper metal here is called the cathode. These solutions here are 1 molar solutions, and you will see this when we discuss standard conditions afterwards. Oxidation always happens in the anode, and that's why I have this thing here called anox, right? That's a little acronym here. And red cat tells you that reduction always happens in the cathode. Now, this is true for both voltaic and electrolytic cells. You will see here that electrons always flow from the anode to the cathode. And as we will discuss further, the anode is always the more reactive metal when we are dealing with a voltaic cell that's made up of 2 metals. Now, let's take a closer look at this here. Here's a little more detailed picture of this. In this case, we have replaced the light bulb with a voltmeter, and you can see here that this particular setup here, voltaic cell, is producing a voltage of 1.1 volts. Now, this is not a physics course, so we're not going to go into details of that, but whenever you have voltage, it's also known as potential difference. That is the difference between the voltage in this half cell and that half cell. And the formula for calculating this voltage that's produced, which by the way is called cell potential, and the symbol is E, and that the little circle here tells us that this is being determined under standard conditions. I'll give you those standard conditions in the next upcoming slides. It is the difference between the voltage of the cathode and the voltage of the anode. Now, we're going to do a full lesson on this, so you guys are familiar with it. Now, when we take a closer look here, you can see that the zinc is undergoing oxidation and it's producing the 2 electrons. As I mentioned on the last slide here, obviously you will notice that over time that zinc will actually start to lose mass here. Those zinc 2 plus ions, this should be a plus, the zinc 2 plus ions are being dumped into the solution here. And the electrons are going through the circuit into the half cell that contains the copper 2 plus ions. And you can see on the other side, the copper 2 plus ions are picking up the electrons and forming solid copper. Here's the zinc, or the anode, losing mass, and here is the copper, or the cathode, gaining mass. The salt bridge, we're going to take a look at it, maintains, it actually completes the circuit. Sometimes you will see some textbooks call the wire the external circuit, and the salt bridge the internal circuit. So, in the external circuit, in the wire, you have electrons that are flowing. There are no electrons flowing in the salt bridge. Inside the salt bridge, you will have ions flowing. You can see here that the anion, in this case, we're using sodium chloride as my salt in the salt bridge. By the way, the salt bridge is also 1 molar solution. You can see that the chloride ions are going into the anode half cell here, or the anode solution, and then the cations are going in this direction. And the purpose of that is to obviously complete the circuit, but it's also to maintain what's called half cell neutrality. What that means is, in this particular solution here, as we are converting solid zinc into zinc 2 plus ions, this solution starts to become positively charged because I am dumping a whole lot of zinc 2 plus ions here from this zinc metal. And on this side, as I'm getting rid of copper 2 plus ions to form solid copper, this side tends to become negatively charged. Now, that has to be maintained neutral for this voltaic cell to continue. That's why the chloride ions come this way, and they tend to neutralize the positive charge here, and the cations will go there to neutralize this. But the movement of the ions is what completes this circuit. So, the salt bridge completes the internal circuit, and it maintains half cell neutrality. If you were given a question with 1 point, this is the answer that I would give. It completes the internal circuit. We can write what's called a shorthand notation, or a cell notation, for a voltaic cell. And the cell notation, or the shorthand notation, follows this. You write the anode, in this case, which is zinc, a single line, and then we will write the anode electrolyte, or electrolyte being the solution here, which in my case is zinc sulfate. Now you can put zinc sulfate, or you can just put zinc 2 plus, and that's good. Then this will be separated by the salt bridge, and the salt bridge is shown with 2 lines. So that's your salt bridge right there, and then followed by the cathode solution, which in this case will be copper 2 plus. So you can say cathode solution or cathode electrolyte. And then separated by a single line, and then you have your cathode. So if you see this, this is known as the cell notation for this particular voltaic cell that's shown. And that is my salt bridge right there. You could be asked to provide the cell notation for a voltaic cell. And like I said, it's basically anode, separated by a single line, anode solution. Now you could have put zinc sulfate, or you can put zinc 2 plus ions, that's fine. Double line, separates the two. That's your salt bridge, then cathode solution, and then your cathode.